You remember the silence before the lightning, not the flash but the stillness that held its breath before it struck. That same stillness lives in you, not peace, not calm, something colder, like stone that remembers being mountain. You weren't always like this. There was a time you flinched, explained, reached, but it dissolved you. So you began to vanish inward. You stopped answering the fire with your skin. You stopped dancing to the scream behind her smile. Now, you only watch. And in that watching, something shifts. They lean closer, they whisper louder. They search for cracks where there are none. They want to see you tremble, not because they hate you, but because it means they still exist. But you've become a myth in their theater, a shadow that does not perform, a presence without reaction, the ghost of judgment walking without chains. And they hate it, and they want it, and they call it power. You were carved to be watched, not to weep. And that is why they follow. You were not born a statue. You became one, slowly, painfully, like rock pulled into form by something deeper than chisel or flame. There was a time when every word they spoke reached into you, bending your spine like a branch in a storm. You thought sensitivity was strength. You thought mirroring their emotion was love. You thought always responding proved that you were alive. But you were wrong, because every time you reacted, you confirmed their power. Every flinch, every defense, every anxious glance into their eyes for approval. It sculpted you not into a man, but into clay, something they could mold, something soft, something waiting to be accepted. But then came the moment that wasn't loud. It never is. It didn't scream like betrayal or thunder like heartbreak. No, it was quieter than that. A sentence spoken without feeling, a glance designed to wound, a dismissal dressed as a joke. And suddenly, you saw it. Not her, not them, but it. The truth underneath the game, the ritual of reaction, the test you were always meant to fail. You realized you weren't being seen, you were being studied, poked, pulled, provoked, and all of it, every word and gesture, was not to understand you but to confirm something inside them. That was the first time you didn't answer, not out of strength, not out of wisdom, but out of something darker, a numbness, a cold curiosity. You simply watched. And in that stillness, something ancient cracked open inside you. Not rage, not resentment, but distance, a holy detachment. The kind a wolf feels before it decides whether to eat or walk away. And they felt it, because suddenly they were alone in the room with themselves, and you were no longer part of their mirror. You had stopped bleeding. And what is more terrifying than a man who cannot be emotionally manipulated? They will call you cold. They will say you are emotionally unavailable, distant, unsafe, intimidating, cruel. But look closer, that is not fear. It is awe wearing the mask of anger. They hate that they cannot summon you with a tear, bait you with a silence, or summon your apology with nothing but a shift in tone. You are the one thing they cannot train, and so they follow you, like moths to a fire that does not flicker. You stand still, and they orbit. Why? Because you offer no assurance, no confirmation. You become the one place in their world that doesn't bend to their hunger. And so you become sacred, terrifying, worshipped, feared. Every game they try to play collapses against your silence. Every tactic, the flattery, the passive cut, the storm of emotion dies the moment it touches your stillness. They don't admire the stone because it moves. They admire it because it never had to. And so you must remain what you have become, the statue that bleeds nothing. Do not speak too soon. Let them wonder. Let them drown in the silence between your glances. Let them pace, perform, unravel. For the more you refuse to participate in their performance, the more they believe you wrote the script. You did not. But that doesn't matter. In the theater of power, perception is authorship. You are not withholding, you are not punishing, you are not playing hard to get. No, you are simply no longer available for sacrifice. And that, in this age, is an act of war. You have stopped apologizing for your unresponsiveness. That was the final chain. You stopped explaining your silences, rationalizing your indifference, softening your sharpness with fake warmth, because you realize that your absence is louder than your presence ever was, and they hear it. You become a void into which their secrets fall, a silence that eats confessions. They speak to you, not because you answer, but because they need someone who will not collapse under their complexity. Your stillness becomes the place they spill what they would never say to those who would respond. But do not mistake their vulnerability for love. It is something else, something more primitive. It is submission without name, a surrender not to you, but to the space you represent, a space that does not judge, flatter, or react. This is where your true power begins. Not in control, not in dominance, but in refusal. Refusal to explain yourself. Refusal to match their chaos. Refusal to bleed on command. And they will test you again. They always do. They will cry just a little too loudly. They will flinch when you do not chase. They will accuse you of apathy, of being the reason they spiral, of being cold when they just wanted warmth. But you know the truth the moment you react. The illusion collapses. The statue becomes flesh again. And they will no longer respect what they can move. So you stay silent, still, not because you enjoy the distance, but because it is the only honest shape you have left. And this is why they admire you. Because deep inside them, behind the performance, behind the manipulation, behind even the desire, there is a hunger for something they can trust. And they do not trust the man who dances for attention. They do not trust the man who apologizes for being whole. They do not trust the man who breaks under emotional weather. They trust the storm that cannot be moved. You have become the immovable, and because of that, they orbit, not always kindly, not always gently, but always in awe, because you do not react. You become the symbol they cannot decode, the question that breaks their rituals, the face that does not change no matter what mask they wear. You are no longer responding to their chaos because you are no longer part of their stage. You are the statue that bleeds nothing, and they call it power, and they hate that it works, and they can't walk away, because now you are not the man they desired. You are the void they whisper their fears into, and the silence that does not save them. Every gesture you withhold breaks the chain louder than a scream. They raised you with a leash made of questions. Are you hungry? Are you okay? What's wrong? Why don't you care? But you were not born with those questions in your mouth. They were taught to you, curled around your throat like soft ropes that promised affection in return for obedience. You learned early that comfort was conditional, that your reactions were the toll required to keep others warm. So you barked on command, you bowed when asked, you howled when they needed a mirror, and still, they flinched at your devotion. Because the truth is, they never wanted your loyalty. They wanted your resistance. Something in them needed you to break the leash, to show them where the fence ended, to prove that a wildness still lived in the male form. But you, confused by reward and punishment, played the role too long. You became domesticated, and they grew restless. This is the great cruelty of submission. It makes them despise you for giving what they asked for. But you are not a dog. You are something older. something that remembers when your body did not answer to language, when your blood was not trained to flinch at tone. You feel it now, the beast in your spine that doesn't care who's watching, the breath you hold when they raise their voice, the impulse not to fight, not to flee but to see, to watch, to become silent in a way that is not passive but fatal. This is not indifference. This is presence without performance. You are still here, but you no longer move in reaction to their lash. And it terrifies them, because if you do not react, they cannot place you. If you do not wince, they cannot locate their power. If you do not answer, they cannot confirm that they exist through you. You have stepped out of the feedback loop. You have exited the prison where identity is forged through mutual explosions. Now, you walk beside them without echo, a man who listens without trembling, a man who feels without confessing, a man who is not ruled by the drama of others. You are no longer the one they can shape. You are the one who sees through the shaping. They begin to panic, not outwardly. No, they perform louder. They cry with more theatrical silence. They grow cruel with a sweetness they know will twist your gut. They say nothing but say it with eyes that beg for a collapse. The moment you flinch, they'll breathe again. But you do not flinch. You do not chase. You do not beg to be understood. You have understood already. And that understanding is your chain breaker. They will accuse you of being unfeeling. But they know better. You are not unfeeling. You are unchained. And it is your refusal to dance that awakens something they forgot. Existed a male will that does not answer to manipulation. They are not drawn to your kindness. They are drawn to the danger of your restraint. Because what does it mean when a man can destroy but does not? What does it mean when he sees through the trick and still does not punish? What kind of animal refuses the whip not with rage but with calm? You. You are that kind. And in your stillness, the old world breaks. Every gesture you withhold is a fracture in their illusion. The illusion that they control the game. The illusion that your identity depends on being allowed inside their circus. But you are done performing. You are no longer hungry for permission. You have stopped licking wounds that were handed to you as gifts. You have stopped kneeling for clarity. You no longer confuse emotion with access. Let them beg. Let them whisper into your silence. Let them dress their need as judgment. You are not here to win them. You are here to witness the end of needing to bore. You have become the mirror that does not flatter, the listener that does not nod, the presence that does not shrink. They feel it like fire in the blood, and they will call it coldness because naming it heat would be too dangerous. They would have to admit that what they feel around you is not rejection, it is exposure. You reflect them back without distortion, without rescue, without need. And that is unbearable for those who only know love as leverage. They will test you again. They will push with silence, pull with tears. They will offer you little fires, hoping you will warm your hands, but you do not. Not because you hate the flame, but because you have become the forest. And the forest does not chase sparks. It waits and watches and burns only when it decides. You have walked away from the need to be the good man, the soft man, the emotionally available vessel. You have seen what that earns not love but consumption. They don't want your soul. They want your reactions. They want your self-erasure served with roses. They want the version of you that bleeds on cue. But that animal died. Now you are the creature that stands when others kneel. The one that does not roar because the absence of sound is louder. The one that leaves, not because it is weak, but because it no longer finds value in being needed. And in this, you are the true danger. Not because you harm, but because you cannot be baited. You have become what they claim does not exist, a man beyond emotional capture. They admire you not for your strength, but for your invisibility to the strings they used to pull. They cannot seduce a ghost. They cannot shame a mountain. They cannot manipulate the animal who no longer obeys the leash. You don't flinch. You don't fetch. You don't fold. And that silence is the loudest thing they've ever heard. When you do not react, you are no longer a guest. You become the room itself. You have not withdrawn. You have taken your place, not at the table, not in the crowd, not among the performers, but as the structure beneath the room, the cold outline of the architecture that cannot be touched. You no longer knock. You no longer ask. You are not invited, and yet you are the presence they orbit. You are not the food, not the wine, not the entertainment. You are the silence beneath the feast, and they cannot eat without it. They perform for you now not because you demand it, but because you don't. Your absence of need sharpens their rituals. They dress more carefully. They speak with curated pauses. They laugh with one eye locked on your face. But you do not flinch, and so their celebration continues in confusion. They don't know whether to seduce you or destroy you, because you do not respond to either. And this is the final fracture. You are no longer part of their strategy, not opponent, not prize, not collaborator. You are outside the rules. A stillness so absolute that it begins to shape the gravity of the room. People speak softer near you, but not out of respect, out of unease. Your silence is not the absence of speech. It is the absence of approval, and that, more than any cruelty, breaks them. Because in a world obsessed with recognition, you have become the one thing they cannot extract validation from. You are not cruel. You are not distant. You are simply unreachable. You cannot be moved, and so they move around you. Not away, around, always circling, testing, reframing, offering new versions of themselves to see if one will cause your expression to change. But you are the feast without a master. They bring their performances. They bring their wounds, their seductions, their confessions. They lay them at your feet. But you do not eat, and in your refusal, they are exposed. They begin to see that their performances were never about sharing, only about being fed by your response. Without your nod, their truth feels weightless. Without your pity, their tears evaporate. Without your anger, their accusations fall into silence. They didn't want your presence. They wanted your reaction. They wanted you to kneel at the altar of their chaos. And when you didn't, they called you arrogant. But arrogance requires an audience, and you are no longer in the theater. You have become the architecture. They talk louder now, not to you, but around you. They question you in your absence. They ask why you stopped caring, but they already know. Because you never stopped caring, you stopped negotiating. You stopped pretending that you were equal in a game designed to punish your sincerity. You stopped offering your fire to those who only wanted to warm their hands and walk away. Now, they see you and remember the cost of power, because it is costly to be unmoved, to stand when others plead, to walk away when everything screams to stay. This is not strength, this is sovereignty, the kind that cannot be traded for affection, the kind that costs connection, ease, admiration. But in return, you gain something else, dominion over yourself, and that is the one empire they cannot conquer. In your stillness, you have become myth, not because you disappeared, but because you no longer bend. You are the man who does not flinch when threatened, does not soften when seduced, does not explain when accused. You do not resist, you decline. You decline to be part of their chaos. You decline to be their savior. You decline to play the game that ends in mutual collapse. This, they cannot understand. They were told power was loud, that it spoke in commands and glances and punishments. But your silence is deeper than threat. It is not cruelty, it is clarity. You are no longer asking to be chosen. You are not in the room to be seen. You are the room, and they feel it. They arrive, they perform, they speak, they ache, and you do not move. And so the silence grows louder. They begin to fracture in your presence, not because you are judging them, but because you are not participating in their disguise. You do not reward the performance. You do not punish it either. You simply see, and in that seeing, everything unravels. They will try again. They always do. They will offer softness, woundedness, vulnerability, not because it is real, but because it used to work. They will cry in the same key that once shattered your spine. They will speak in tones that used to melt your guard, but you have no guard, and so there is nothing left to melt. You are not resisting, you are abiding. You are no longer the man who protects his heart with armor. You are the man who no longer offers it to thieves. And that makes you dangerous, not because you are hard, but because you are not available for conquest. They do not love the man who bends. They love the man who does not flinch. But they will never say it aloud. Instead, they will call you stoic, emotionless, unreachable. Because to name you rightly would be to admit that power does not come from control, it comes from refusal. And you refuse everything that is beneath you, not from pride, from instinct. The instinct that knows when a table is cursed, that knows when a feast is not food but bait. You do not eat from every hand that offers. You do not respond to every voice that cries. You have become the room, the silence that watches, the presence that cannot be consumed. And they admire you for it, and they resent you for it, and they return to you again and again, hoping that this time your face will change, but it never does. Because you do not perform, you do not chase, you do not flinch. You are the feast without a master, and that is why they come hungry, and that is why they leave starving. Because they wanted your reaction and you gave them your absence. They wanted to be fed by your need and you brought none. They wanted to conquer and found a kingdom made of mirrors, and in every mirror they see themselves not you, never you, because you are not theirs. You are no longer anyone's. You are the echo they cannot silence, the judgment they cannot name, the room that never answers but never forgets. Somewhere, in a dream they won't remember, they return to that room, the one without windows, the one where the air never moved, but their thoughts screamed. You are already there, not standing, not sitting, just present, the shape of something they once tried to move. They speak again something sweet, something cruel, something clever, but the walls do not echo, the silence does not applaud, and for the first time they feel it, the weight of their own voice falling flat. No laughter, no correction, no forgiveness, only a statue that never wept, an animal that never bowed, a feast they could never touch. And just before the dream fades, they hear it. Not a voice, not a sound, just the sensation that they were being watched by something that could have loved them, but didn't need to, and never will.